That day, I wasn't just a passenger on the flight. I was a witness to something that no one could have written in a script. The
I paid
airport
for
was
this
buzzing
seat.
with the usual energy. Rolling
Sir, please calm
suitcases,
down.
loud announcements,
This is
children
unacceptable.
crying as parents. Tried to
Unfortunately,
keep
due to
them in
unforeseen
line.
circumstances,
I had
this
been on
flight must be
dozens of flights
grounded.
before, but that morning felt heavier somehow. Like the air carried a secret waiting to unfold.
Sir, we have a major
I found
disturbance
my
in first
seat in
class.
the middle of the plane, aisle seat. Not too bad. I slipped my bag under the chair and leaned back, watching people pass by. That's when she entered. You could tell from the moment she walked down the aisle. She wasn't ordinary. She was young, maybe late 20s. Elegant yet. Simple, dressed in casual travel clothes. But there was a quiet power in the way she carried herself. Some passengers turned their heads, whispering softly. I overheard one man in front of me say, "That's her. That billionaire girl who made headlines last year." I didn't know her name, but I remembered reading about her. A tech entrepreneur who built an empire in just a few years. One of the youngest black billionaires in the world. But here's the thing, despite her fame and wealth, she was boarding the plane just like the rest of us. No assistants, no entourage, just her and her boarding pass. She reached her row, but her seat was not empty. A tall white man in a business suit was already sitting there, relaxed, legs stretched out, flipping through his phone. As if nothing was wrong, she stopped, politely smiled, and said, "Excuse me, I think that's my seat." He didn't even look up at first, just waved his hand like brushing off a fly, and muttered, "Seats are all the same. You can take another one." Her smile faded slightly, but her voice remained calm. "No, I paid for this seat. It's one for a... Can you please check your ticket?" This time, he looked up, his eyes sharp, his smirk arrogant. "Listen, sweetheart, I've flown more times than you can count. Nobody cares about these little seat numbers. Sit somewhere else and don't make a scene." The aisle went silent. Passengers nearby froze. Some pretending not to watch, but everyone listening. I could feel the tension crawl through the air like static electricity. She held her ground. "Sir, with respect, this is my seat. You need to move." He laughed, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Oh, really? And what if I don't? What are you going to do? Sue me with your billions?" My jaw clenched hearing that. His tone wasn't just rude. It was mocking, dismissive, full of the kind of entitlement that poisons the air. In small spaces like this, the flight attendant arrived, a young woman in her 30s, her professional smile trembling slightly as she asked, "Is there a problem here?" The billionaire girl handed her ticket to the attendant, calm and steady. "This is my seat." But he refuses to move. The man leaned back in the chair like a king on his throne. "I'm comfortable here. Can't she just sit somewhere else? I'm sure her money can buy her another seat." The flight attendant checked his ticket and immediately frowned. "Sir, your seat is actually 22C. That's back there near the rear of the plane." Gasps rippled through the passengers. Heads turned, whispers grew louder. But the man didn't budge. "I'm not moving. I got here first. She can take 22C if it matters so much." The flight attendant tried again, firmer this time. "Sir, she has the right to this seat. Please move so we can continue boarding." And that's when his mask slipped. His face hardened, his voice dropped lower. "I'm not moving. And if you push me, you'll regret it." The billionaire girl didn't flinch. She simply stood there, silent, watching him. Her calmness made him look smaller, weaker, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Minutes passed. Tension built like a storm, ready to break. Passengers started recording with their phones, some whispering, others shaking their heads in disbelief. I felt my heart race as I watched, thinking, how could something so small, one seat, turn into something so heavy? But deep down, I knew this wasn't about a seat. It was about respect, about dignity, about a man who thought. Rules didn't apply to him, and a woman who refused to let him steal what was hers. The flight attendant whispered into her radio, calling for the captain. And that's when I realized this was far from over. The engines outside roared, passengers grew restless, time was slipping. Yet the plane could not move, because one man refused to leave one seat, and I couldn't help but think, if you were sitting there watching this unfold, what would you do? Would you stay quiet and avoid the drama? Or would you speak up and stand by her side? The air inside the cabin grew heavier with each passing second. Whispers spread like wildfire. Phones were up recording. Some passengers even live streaming, but through it all, she stood calm, unshaken, as if she knew something the rest of us didn't. Then I saw him, the captain, tall, composed, his crisp uniform carrying authority without a word. He walked down the aisle slowly, eyes scanning the scene. Silence followed him. The kind of silence that only comes when people know something serious is about to happen. He stopped at the row, looked at the man in the stolen seat, then at the billionaire girl. His jaw tightened ever so slightly. "Sir," the captain said firmly, "this is not your seat. Please move to your assigned location so we can depart on time." The man smirked, leaned back even further, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I'm not moving. I don't care who she is. She can sit somewhere else." The captain's eyes narrowed. You could almost hear his patience thinning. "Sir, this plane does not move until you comply. You're delaying the entire flight." The man crossed his arms, his arrogance dripping with every word. "So ground it then. I paid for a ticket. I'm sitting here." Gasps echoed through the cabin. Even the flight attendants looked shaken. Nobody expected him to challenge the captain like that. The billionaire girl finally spoke again, her voice soft but sharp. "You're not just stealing my seat. You're disrespecting every single passenger here, all of us who followed the rules." Her words hit harder than I expected. Passengers began to murmur in agreement, nodding, some even clapping quietly. The tide was turning, but the man wasn't done. He laughed bitterly. "Oh, look, the billionaire wants sympathy from regular folks. Don't kid yourself. These people don't care about you. They care about getting home." The captain stepped closer, his tone colder now. "Sir, if you refuse to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to remove you from this aircraft permanently." The man's eyes flared. His pride wouldn't let him back down. "Then do it. I dare you." The billionaire girl folded her arms. Still silent, her calmness was unnerving, like she knew this moment was bigger than a seat, bigger than a flight. And then something happened that none of us expected. The captain didn't move. The attendants didn't argue. Instead, they all exchanged glances. Then the captain said into his radio, "Ground the aircraft. No movement until resolved." The hum of the engines faded. The lights dimmed slightly, and a collective groan of frustration filled the plane. But underneath that frustration, there was a sharp tension, because this wasn't just about a man refusing a seat anymore. This was about control, authority, dignity. The man smirked like he had won. "See, she caused this, not me." But the billionaire girl finally turned to face him fully. And for the first time, her calm mask shifted. Her eyes burned with something deeper. "Do you even realize what you've done?" she asked, voice still steady. You didn't just disrespect me. You've put everyone here in danger. Because a grounded plane doesn't just delay passengers. It delays the entire system. Connections, schedules, lives. He laughed. Spare me your speeches. You're just another spoiled rich kid playing victim. But passengers weren't laughing. They were angry now, angry at him. One woman shouted, "Move to your seat already." Another man added, "We're all waiting because of you." The cabin erupted, voices rising, pointing at him, recording him, dozens of eyes cutting into him like knives. And for the first time, his smirk faltered, his arrogance cracked. Still, he tried one last push. "You people don't scare me. I'm not moving until I'm ready." The captain's voice boomed, then, sharp, final, "Sir, you have 10 seconds to comply, or you will be escorted off this flight by security, banned from flying this airline, and possibly facing charges for obstruction." Silence again. The billionaire girl's eyes never left him. Calm, strong, waiting. And that's when he muttered something under his breath. Something that made my blood run cold. "You think you've won, but people like me always win?" His words carried an arrogance so deep, so poisonous. It was almost like a threat. But then he leaned back, refusing to move still. And in that moment, I realized this was no longer a fight over a seat. This was a fight over power, pride, and something far darker. The cabin was frozen, the captain unmoving, the billionaire unflinching, and all of us caught in the middle of a storm that hadn't even started yet. I sat there thinking, if you were in that seat beside me, would you cheer for the captain to drag him out? Or would you stay silent, hoping someone else makes the first move? The cabin was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air system above our heads. Even the crying child 3 rows back had gone silent. It was like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next move. The man still sat smugly in the billionaire girl's seat, his body language screaming defiance. Chin high, arms crossed, legs stretched into the aisle as if he owned it. The captain didn't move, he just stared at him, and for a long moment. It felt like a silent battle of wills. Then the billionaire girl leaned forward slightly, her voice low but steady. "Do you even hear yourself? You're risking every person on this flight just because you want to prove a point." Her words weren't loud, but somehow they cut sharper than any scream. The man scoffed. "You think because you have money, people should bow to you? I'm teaching you a lesson. Money doesn't buy respect." Something in the way he said, "teaching you a lesson," made my stomach twist. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. There was venom in his tone, like he wanted to humiliate her. The passengers were restless now, voices rising again. "Get him out. He's stalling us all." Unbelievable. Phones stayed up, capturing every second. The red recording lights glowing like dozens of tiny eyes in the dark. Then came the announcement, a voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a passenger incident, this flight will remain grounded until further notice. Please remain seated." The collective groan that followed was deafening. But underneath the frustration, there was a growing fire. Not just against the man, but against the injustice of it all. And then something happened, something small, but powerful. The billionaire girl stood, slowly, gracefully, and without breaking eye contact with the man, she turned, stepped into the aisle, and offered her seatbelt to the captain. "I'll stand," she said calmly, "if that's what it takes to get everyone home." The entire cabin gasped. Whispers shot like sparks. Phones zoomed in. The man smirked wider. "See, even she knows her place." But then, the reaction was not what he expected. Passengers began to clap softly at first, and louder, not for him, but for her, because in that single act, she showed more dignity than his arrogance could ever hold. And the more they clapped, the more his face twitched, the cracks in his pride growing deeper. The captain shook his head firmly. "No, ma'am, you will not give up your seat. The manifest is clear. It belongs to you, and the flight will not move until this man complies." But she kept, standing, her presence like a quiet storm. The man suddenly slammed his hand against the armrest, making several people flinch. His face red now, his voice rising. "You're all blind. You clap for her because she's rich, because she's got cameras on her all the time. You think she cares about you? She doesn't." His rant grew wilder, louder, his words dripping with spite. "She walks off this plane to her private mansion while you all crawl back to your little houses, and you cheer her? Pathetic." Gasps, murmurs, even some nervous laughter. The meltdown was happening right before our eyes. The billionaire. Girl didn't move, didn't react. She just looked at him with quiet pity, and somehow that silence was louder than his rage. Finally, the captain's patience shattered. "Sir," he barked, "you are now in violation of federal law. Security is on its way. You will not fly today, and you may not fly for a very long time." The man froze, and for the first time, genuine fear flickered across his face. But he quickly masked it with more bravado. "You can't ban me. You don't have the guts." But the sound of heavy footsteps outside the cabin door silenced him. The unmistakable sound of approaching security. People leaned into the aisle, eyes wide, whispering, recording. The billionaire girl finally spoke again, her voice softer than ever, but it carried through the cabin. "You had a choice, dignity or pride, and you chose wrong." Her words landed like a final nail in his coffin. And just then, the door opened. 2 security officers stepped inside, tall, serious, their presence shifting the entire atmosphere. The man laughed nervously, still trying to act bold. "This is ridiculous. I paid for a ticket. This is my seat now." But nobody was listening anymore. The tide had turned completely. The officers approached, and for the first time, the man shifted uncomfortably, his confidence cracking, his hands tightening around the armrest, like a child refusing to leave a playground. The captain looked at him one last time. "Final chance. Sir, walk off on your own, or be removed." The man's eyes darted around, at the passengers, at the cameras, at the billionaire. Girl, and I swear, I saw a flicker of regret. But it was too late. He didn't move. The officers leaned in, one gripping his arm, the other standing ready, and the whole cabin erupted into whispers, some gasping, some cheering quietly. And as they prepared to drag him out, I couldn't help but think, was this about a stolen seat, or was it something deeper, something inside him that couldn't stand to lose, even when losing was the only choice left? And that makes me wonder, if you were in his shoes, would you swallow your pride and stand up, or would you let arrogance drag you down in front of the world? The cabin air felt heavier now, like the oxygen had thickened into tension itself. Every passenger was leaning forward, eyes locked on the unfolding scene. The 2 officers didn't rush. They moved with that calm, terrifying certainty of men who had done this many times before. Slow, steady steps down the narrow aisle. The man in the billionaire girl's seat was no longer smug, but he wasn't surrendering either. His hands clenched the armrests so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead. And yet, there was still defiance. In his eyes, a spark of fight that refused to go out. One of the officers spoke firmly. "Sir, this is your last chance. Please stand up and exit the aircraft willingly." The man shook his head violently. "No, no, this isn't happening. I'm not going anywhere." His voice cracked, louder than before. Bouncing off the cabin walls, some passengers flinched, others rolled their eyes. But no one looked away. The billionaire girl remained standing calm, watching almost like she was studying him, as if his meltdown was just another piece of data to analyze. The captain crossed his arms tightly at the cockpit door. His jaw locked with quiet anger. And then it happened. The officers leaned in, hands gripping his arms, pulling him upward with controlled force. The man resisted violently, thrashing in his seat, his legs kicking against the aisle, the tray table snapping down with a crack. A wave of gasps swept through the cabin. Phones zoomed closer. The moment was being immortalized from every angle. "Stop resisting," one officer barked. But the man shouted over him. "This is assault. I paid for this seat. She's the one who should leave." He jerked his head toward the billionaire girl. And for a second, his rage turned into a twisted grin. Look at her, standing there like some saint, recording her victory. "You people are fools." But nobody agreed. The silence that followed was louder than any boo or cheer could have been. Passengers' faces were united now, not in wealth or class, but in disgust at him, in quiet solidarity with her. The billionaire girl didn't respond. She just tilted her head slightly, her silence more damning than any words could be. The officers finally yanked him up, his body stumbling into the aisle, his legs shaking as he tried to dig his heels into the carpet. The cabin was chaos. Now, phones shaking as people struggled to capture every second. Some cheering under their breath, others murmuring disbelief. One woman in the back called out, "Just take him already." A man shouted, "He's wasting everyone's time." A man spun his head toward the voices, his face red. "You're all sheep, all of you. You clap for the rich and spit on the rest of us." His words hung in the air like venom. But instead of winning sympathy, they only hardened the room against him. The billionaire girl's expression shifted just slightly, her lips pressing together in what looked like sadness, not triumph, as though she saw through his rage and glimpsed something broken beneath it. The officers began escorting him down the aisle, one gripping his arm tightly, the other keeping his hands close to his belt in case things escalated further. As he stumbled forward, the man's eyes darted to every phone, every lens capturing his downfall. And then he laughed. Not a confident laugh, not a smug laugh, but a hollow, cracked sound. "You'll regret this, all of you," he muttered, almost to himself. "She doesn't care about you. She never will." It sent a shiver down my spine, because it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like the last gasp of a man who had lost everything in a single moment. The cabin door swung open, the bright airport lights spilling in like a spotlight. The officer shoved him forward, and with one final thrash of resistance, he was dragged out of sight, the door slamming shut behind him. And just like that, the tension broke. A loud cheer erupted, applause rolling through the cabin like thunder, people clapping, whistling, some even shouting "good riddance." But through it all, the billionaire girl didn't cheer, didn't smile. She simply sat back down in her rightful seat, clipped her belt, and closed her eyes. Her silence carried more power than the noise around her. The captain returned to the cockpit without a word. The engines hummed louder as if exhaling. Relief? I glanced around the cabin. Faces glowing with adrenaline, passengers whispering about what they had just witnessed, some already uploading clips to social media. A part of me wondered what the headlines would say tomorrow. Passenger dragged off plane after seat dispute with billionaire. Arrogance versus dignity at 30,000 feet. But another part of me, the part that couldn't look away from the billionaire girl's calm face, wondered something deeper. What gave her that strength, that ability to remain composed when every insult, every ounce of hate was hurled her way? Was it her wealth, her upbringing, or something else entirely? Something inside her that no money could buy. And that makes me want to ask you, if you were sitting in her place and the world was watching, would you have stayed silent with dignity, or would you have fought back with words? The cabin was still buzzing. The sound of clapping had died down, but whispers filled every corner of the plane. Some people were excited, already checking their phones to see if their videos had gone viral. Others sat back with exhausted sighs, desperate for the flight to finally take off. And yet, despite the noise, I felt a strange silence in myself, like the echo of what had just happened was still bouncing around in my head. The seat beside me was empty now, the man's presence erased like a stain scrubbed away. But the memory of his defiance, his words, lingered. She doesn't care about you. She never will. That line kept playing in my mind, not because I believed it, but because of the way he said it, broken, desperate, almost like it was a confession rather than an attack. The billionaire girl sat in her seat with perfect stillness, eyes closed, as if none of this mattered, or maybe as if it all mattered too much. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom, steady but sharp. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We had to resolve a situation that compromised the safety of this flight. We are now cleared for departure. A soft cheer rippled through the cabin. The engines roared louder. The plane shuddered forward along the runway. As the nose lifted into the sky, I looked around again. The older couple behind me leaned together, whispering about how entitled people can be these days. The young man across the aisle was furiously typing on his phone, no doubt crafting the perfect tweet. The flight attendants walked down the aisle with smiles that looked forced, like they were still holding their breath from the storm that had just passed. And yet all eyes, every so often, drifted back to her, the girl who had stayed calm through it all. It was as if her silence had created its own gravity, pulling attention without her asking for it. The seatbelt sign dinged off, the plane leveled, and the cabin began to settle. That's when something unexpected happened. A little girl from 2 rows up, maybe 7 or 8 years old, got up from her seat, walked down the aisle shyly, and stopped beside the billionaire girl. She looked up at her with wide eyes and said softly, "You're really brave." The billionaire girl opened her eyes, for the first time in what felt like forever, and smiled, not a big showy smile, but something quiet and genuine. "Thank you," she whispered back. The little girl nodded, as if she'd just met a superhero, and skipped back to her seat. The entire exchange lasted no more than 10 seconds, but it hit me harder than the entire confrontation before, because bravery wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was silent. Sometimes it was just holding your ground when the world tried to shove you aside. But then, just as the calm seemed to return, the twist arrived. The head flight attendant walked quickly down the aisle, her expression tense again. She leaned close to the billionaire girl and whispered something, too low for the rest of us to hear. But I saw the girl's reaction. Her face didn't change, except for her eyes. They sharpened, focused, like a switch had been flipped inside her. She unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, stood up, and followed the flight attendant toward the galley. disappearing behind the curtain at the front of the cabin. The passengers noticed, eyes darting, whispers starting again. What now? Someone muttered, "Are they questioning her?" Another whispered. I leaned forward, straining to catch any clue, but the curtain stayed closed. The hum of the engines drowning out everything. Minutes passed. Too many minutes when she finally returned. Her expression was unreadable. She sat down quietly, buckled up again, and closed her eyes just as before. But something was different. Her posture wasn't the same calm composure anymore. It was tighter, heavier, like she was carrying a new weight no one else could see. The man who had been dragged off the plane was gone, and yet it felt like his shadow was still here, haunting the air we breathed. And then the whispers started spreading from the back of the plane. I heard the police want to question her when we land. Maybe she has something to do with it. They wouldn't just call her up front for no reason. Rumors travel fast in a closed cabin, faster than the speed of sound, and I found myself staring at her again, wondering, what had the flight attendant told her? What had the crew whispered that made her face harden like stone? The billionaire girl remained silent. Her stillness now no longer calm, but mysterious. Passengers kept sneaking photos. Phones angled subtly in her direction. Everyone wanting a piece of the story that was still unfolding in real time. I sat back against my seat, my chest tight with questions. What would happen when we landed? Would she be met by flashing lights and officers, or by cameras and reporters? The man who had mocked her was gone, but somehow it felt like the real story was only just beginning. And I have to ask you, if you were on that plane, sitting just a few seats away, would you trust her silence? Or would you wonder if the truth was something far more complicated than we could see? The engines roared louder as the pilot announced we had started our descent. My stomach tightened, not because of the usual nerves that come with landing, but because of the silence that had taken over the cabin. Everyone was waiting, not for the ground below, but for the moment the billionaire girl would finally face whatever waited for her outside the plane. She hadn't moved since she came back from the galley, still, eyes closed, arms resting on her lap like a statue carved out of patience and defiance. But I could see the tension in the set of her jaw, in the way her fingers pressed faintly against her knees. The whispers around me grew sharper the closer we got. They said police are waiting at the gate. She must be in trouble. Or maybe she's the victim here. No one really knew. But everyone had already chosen a side in their minds. The plane shuddered as the wheels hit the runway, bouncing hard before gripping the asphalt. The sound of the engines reversing filled the cabin like thunder. And then, the moment the plane slowed to a crawl, dozens of heads turned in the same direction. Toward her, the seat belt sign was still on, but people were restless, shifting, phones ready in their hands. I could feel it too, that strange electricity in the air, the kind you get right before a storm breaks. When the plane finally stopped at the gate, the captain's voice came back, calm, rehearsed, but with an edge of finality. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Law enforcement will be boarding shortly. The words hit the cabin like an explosion. Gasps, mutters, sharp intakes of breath. I froze in my seat, my eyes snapping to the billionaire girl. Her expression didn't change, not one bit. She simply opened her eyes slowly, like she had been expecting those exact words. All along, the doors opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, moving with deliberate calm, their faces unreadable. They didn't look at anyone else. Their eyes locked straight onto her. The billionaire girl stood before they even reached her row, her movement smooth, graceful, not rushed. She pulled down her small carry-on bag from the overhead bin with one hand and looked at the officers without fear. The silence inside the cabin was so thick I could hear the faint hum of the air vents. Passengers craned their necks, desperate to capture every second. Some recording with their phones under their jackets, others just frozen in shock. One of the officers spoke, his voice steady. "Miss, we'll need you to come with us." And she answered with only two words, "I know." No protest, no questions, just certainty. She walked past me, her steps measured, her chin held high. And for the first time, I caught the faintest trace of something in her eyes. Not fear, not anger, but something colder. Something that made my chest tighten. Resolve. Officers escorted her off the plane, and just like that, she was gone. Swallowed by the world beyond the cabin door. The passengers erupted. What did she do? Was she guilty? Maybe she set this whole thing up. Or maybe she's more powerful than anyone thinks. The speculation was wild, reckless, feeding itself like fire on dry leaves. I sat frozen, my thoughts chasing each other in circles. The billionaire girl hadn't looked like someone guilty of anything. She looked like someone who knew exactly what was waiting for her, and wasn't afraid of it. As we finally deboarded, I stepped into the jet bridge. And that's when I saw it, through the glass wall of the terminal. A swarm of flashing lights, cameras raised high, reporters shouting, microphones stretched forward like spears, and beyond them, a row of officers standing stiff, waiting. She was there at the center, calm as ever, standing tall among the chaos, her presence commanding even more attention than the spectacle itself. The man who had mocked her, the one dragged off the plane earlier, was nowhere to be seen, but somehow I felt his shadow in all of this, like a ghost lurking just out of sight. Was he connected? Had this been more than just a stolen seat? The crowd outside was roaring now, voices clashing over each other, questions, accusations, desperate shouts. And yet, she didn't flinch, she didn't even blink. It was as if she had been through this storm before, and knew how to walk through it untouched. That's when the strangest thought hit. Maybe this wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was the beginning. Because as she stepped forward into the sea of flashing lights and shouting voices, there was only one question that mattered. What power does she hold? That even being dragged into the spotlight doesn't break her. And now I want to ask you, if you were standing there in the airport, watching her walk into that storm, would you see her as a victim, or as someone holding secrets far greater than any of us could imagine? The air in the terminal felt heavier than the air inside the plane. No one was rushing for baggage claims. No one was running for connecting flights. Everyone's eyes were locked on one scene, the billionaire girl, standing tall at the center of chaos. Cameras flashed like lightning, microphones shoved closer, reporters yelling questions that tangled into each other. Why were you removed from the flight? Are the rumors true? Do you have ties to the investigation? But she didn't answer. She didn't even glance at them. The officers around her looked uneasy, as if they weren't guarding her, but being led by her. That was the strangest thing. It didn't feel like she was in custody. It felt like she was in control. I slowed my steps, keeping close, enough to hear, far enough not to be noticed. My heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. Then I heard it, a low murmur from a man beside me. That's her, the one who owns the airline. The words hit me like a bolt of lightning. The billionaire girl, not just a passenger, not just a wealthy traveler. She was the owner of the very airline we had been flying on. Everything suddenly twisted in my mind. The stolen seat, the grounded flight, the officers waiting. It wasn't random. It was orchestrated. But by who? She finally spoke, her voice steady and calm, yet sharp enough to cut through the chaos like glass. This isn't about a seat. Every microphone stretched closer. Every camera leaned in. This is about respect. About how people see what they want to see and forget what's real. The crowd hushed. Even the shouts seemed to fade under the weight of her words. Her eyes moved across the sea of faces, scanning the room as if she was challenging every single one of them. Power doesn't come from money. It doesn't come from status. It comes from knowing who you are and not letting anyone take that away. Her words burned, not loud, but deep. And then, in a twist that froze me in place, the officers around her stepped back, not forward, not to drag her away, but to clear a path for her. The realization struck like a slap. She wasn't being arrested. She was being escorted, protected. The white passenger who had stolen her seat was nowhere in sight. But whispers spread quickly. Some said he was already detained in another room. Others claimed he had been handed over to federal agents. The story shifted in real time, from her being mocked to her being the one who walked out untouched, unbroken and untouchable. The crowd erupted again, but this time in a different tone. Not just curiosity, but awe, confusion, and maybe even fear. She walked forward. The path cleared before her like the tide pulling away from the shore, her heels striking against the polished floor like a rhythm that commanded attention. For a moment, she stopped right in front of me, her eyes locking onto mine. And in that brief second, I felt it, that weight, that fire, that knowledge, that she carried something more than wealth, something more than power. It was the kind of presence you don't forget, the kind that makes you question what you just witnessed and what it really meant. She gave me the faintest smile, small, sharp, deliberate, and then she turned away, disappearing into the sea of flashing lights and guards. And just like that, she was gone. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Was it all planned? Was the stolen seat just bait to expose something bigger? Or was it pure chance? A random act of arrogance by a passenger that pulled the mask off a power none of us were supposed to see. The terminal buzzed with noise again. Reporters chasing, passengers gossiping, phones lighting up as clips spread online in seconds. But inside me, only one question echoed. Had we just witnessed a woman humiliated and mocked rise above the chaos with grace? Or had we just been played in a game so much bigger than we could ever understand? And so I'll leave it to you. If you had seen her smile that last moment, would you believe it was the smile of victory? Or the smile of someone hiding a truth none of us could handle?